Welcome to Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And today we are talking to the author. Today we are talking to the author of Sunray Alice, Jeremy Hepler. Say hi, Jeremy.
Hi, how's it going, everybody?
Pretty good, man. And let's dive into this. What got you into horror?
Into horror, like I guess as the initially would be like as the feeling outside of literature, it would be just growing up. My brother was 4 years older than me, and so this would have been the early 80s, mid 80s. And he would, after my parents went to bed at night, we would go in the living room and he would put in horror movies, Friday 13th, the Jason movies, all of those, and we'd watch them until 2 and 3 in the morning. I was 6, 7, 8 years old, and it would scare the crap out of me. And I would go back to the bedroom, at 2 or 3 in the morning, and there was some canyons down the street from our house. And I would assume, those murderers were out there. They were right there. And when they came to town, they were going to come right to my window, right to my house. I totally believed that. And that suspense and fear kept me up a lot of times all night, literally, like I would not sleep. And then the next day would come, and throughout the day, it would start to get boring. That suspense would fade, the fear feeling would fade. And the next night I would want it again. I would want that feeling. It was like a drug to know that, there is something out there, something you can't explain, something to be scared of, something to fight. That whole feeling of fear, I think, was initially started in that sense growing up then when I was younger, because of my older brother introducing me to shows. Probably 6, 7-year-olds shouldn't have been watching, but that's where I think I got the addiction, because I have an obsessive, addictive personality anyway. And so like I became addicted to the feeling. In a literature sense, it came probably around 6th grade. I was in an advanced reading class, and our teacher, Mrs. Close, the first story she had us read was The Lottery. And up until then, you're reading cookie cutter shit like Roald Dahl and E.B. White and The Trumpet Swan. You're reading all these stuff when you're in grade, and I understand the reason for all that and stuff, of course, to instill positive. But we walk in there, and she has us read that, and I'm expecting a positive ending, because we didn't have readers in my house. Nobody in my house read. We didn't have books. It wasn't like that where I grew up. And so when the end of that story came and she got stoned to death, I freaking loved it. I was like, oh my God, yes. Like, where are these stories? This is a real story. This is a story where people get the shaft sometimes. You get fucked even if you didn't do anything wrong. There are some things that end bad. And I connected with that more on a visceral, personal level than I ever had any of those happy-go-lucky, good guys always win, everything turns out positive, because my life at home, my personal life, was nothing like that. And it was more like The Lottery. And so on a personal level, and after that, she also had us read Poe. She introduced us to the Telltale Heart we read in there. We read Emily Dickinson. We also read Robert Frost and stuff, but that's when I started realizing, man, there's stories out there like this, and those are the ones I want to find. Those are the ones I want to read. And so after that is when I started searching out stuff like that, darker literature pieces.
Before Brennan jumps in, I want to just focus real quick on Robert Frost. That's really interesting for those that don't know, a New England poet. I'm curious what you took away from studying him in school, and specifically on poetry, what that does to you as a writer of prose.
Right. I really, the main point I remember, was it the road less taken or less traveled? What was his? I'm trying to remember. We had to write, but with his stuff, I don't know. I really don't remember a lot of what we did. We did the main poems, but I just loved his voice. I loved the way he addressed things very simply and very crisply and cut and dry and directly. But she taught us how on a deeper level, you can do stuff really direct and short and curt, but have such a deep impact and meaning behind such a small amount of words, and such a short message can carry so much weight if you deliver it properly and if you deliver it in the right sense. And that was something that our teacher reinforced about the stuff he wrote. And I think that, of course, goes into longer literature and anything. When it comes to the weight of words, not needing to be wordy to carry a lot of weight. I think that's probably what I took the most out of that. I mean, again, I was in the 6th grade, so my comprehension level wasn't the fullest at the time, but
No, I mean, that's a fantastic.
that's what I
answer.
know that she tried to enforce on us. She was trying to teach us this higher level thinking that I guess a lot of us weren't even there yet, or you were just starting to develop that mindset as a young person. You know, your mind was just starting to develop that even ability to think that deeply and beyond words, beyond actual just the sentence itself.
Oh,
Critical thinking.
That's a really in-depth answer, actually. Actually, you know what, Brennan, let me ask you, would you say it's fair to call someone a New Englander if they aren't born there, but kind of like grow up there? Because I said he's a New Englander, but I know.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So from what he said earlier on, do you have anything to take away? Not about Frost, but anything else that he mentioned?
I think the whole point of, introducing poetry in sixth grade, I'm speaking completely for myself, but, as a sixth grade boy, I was not ready to appreciate the depth of poetry, in a way that I would be later in my life. But at the same time, to get that introduction, I think is important, even if it's only to stress the importance of this kind of as an art form. And yeah, there's so much poetry out there that does feel like its aim is to just go 9 feet over your head. And I'm paraphrasing here, so I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm sure somebody will correct me in the comments. But his famous line was, two roads diverge in a snowy wood, and I took the one less traveled, and it has made all the difference. And that's, I mean, even a 10-year-old and 11-year-old can take something away from that, like, make your own path. Don't necessarily go the route that you feel like you're supposed to initially, and just, be your own person, I suppose, is even, part of that. But now we're going down, a route of analyzing poetry instead of talking about Jeremy. So let's do a little 180. I like your kind of self-diagnosis of having an obsessive personality and going from recognizing the enjoyment of that feeling of being scared, of harnessing that like almost adrenaline, and then kind of eventually getting to the point where you find it just bottled in this Shirley Jackson story and going to seek out more and more of that. So, you told us you began to kind of seek out the dark stuff. At what point did you say, I could create this magic?
Early on, I never really thought about writing. I think the earliest, like when I think back to like, I never thought I want to create it until I was a little older, maybe late teens. But what I would do back then is when we would have book reports due, right? We'd be sent to the library, pick out a book, write the report. When I would pick out a book, if I didn't like the book, I would make up my own freaking plot. I would just make up what it was about, make up the story and turn that in, because I'd be like, this book sucked. This is what it should have been based on the kick-ass cover and the title. Here's what I expected. And I didn't get that. So I would create my own basic book reviews to turn in. And I think, like, thinking back, that's probably the first time I started creating my own stories. And I would just turn them in. Most of the times the teachers didn't even they just check mark it anyway, because you don't want to read 120, book reports. Some teachers would, some don't. It just depends, I guess. But so most times I got away with it. It didn't really matter. Very rarely did the teacher actually realize, I just fucking made something up, right? But not until later, maybe in my late teens, when I was living in Austin, is when I started actually wanting to create short stories. Like, actually, I saw in the Chronicle there, which is a very, hip paper that goes out and stuff in the college scene, and they would have contests for South by Southwest and different things. And there was a short story contest, and I had been beating around ideas in my head. Everywhere I go, I see things. I'll see somebody sitting on the side of the road, and I'm like, man, I wonder where it came from. What if he just killed somebody? Did he just walk out of the woods? Like, my imagination's always running. And so I started thinking, well, when I saw that there was going to be that contest, I was like, well, I'll write a short story for it. Fuck it, I'm going to do it. And so right then I wrote that one. Of course, didn't win or anything, sent it in. But after that, from then on, I started writing a book right after that. I just was like, all right, I'm going to keep doing this because I enjoyed it so much. And that's when it really kicked in that I want to create stuff And I actually started taking it seriously, probably around 19, 20 years old or so. But that's what kick-started it, I guess.
That's excellent.
I like that.
Um,
I liked how you, sorry to cut you off. I like how you can just kind of, see things that most people won't even think about and start plotting things in your head. I forget who and where I heard this, but when you are a writer, you start to analyze life in a different way than, say, your average Joe. Not to say we're smarter or whatever, it's just a different way to look at life. And you create stories, and that's all I got to say in that. It's just really interesting to point out, because I never thought of it like that until I really started diving into, like, realizing I want to be a novelist. And
Sure.
maybe someone listening to this will be like, oh yeah, that's an interesting way to look at life. Brennan, go ahead, buddy.
yeah, no, I I totally agree with the go for it, mentality. I think that's kind of what you have to do. Now, you got your start kind of writing short stories, but when you say then you tried a novel, was The Boulevard Monster your first attempt at a novel, or did you have a couple trunk things before that?
I didn't, that was actually my second novel. The novel I started writing after that first short story got about a chapter in and tossed, And then after that, I went through about, that would have been the early 2000s. And there was a 10 or almost an 8 to 10 year period after that where all I wrote was short stories. And I also at the time started working for a magazine back in maybe 2003 called Lullaby Hearse. It was a magazine that came out of New York run by Sarah Jacobs. And I got a job working for her as a slush reader and a book reviewer. And that's when I think, started to grow as a writer, because I was starting to read slush reading, man, just hundreds. And I worked for her for a couple of years, and I kept submitting my own short stories. Then I got a job with at Dark Discoveries magazine doing slush reading and book reviewing for their magazine back when James Beach used to run it. And I pretty much did that for a few years too. And again, the whole time I'm reading short stories, I'm writing short stories, and a lot of short stories I would get to maybe 5,000, 6,000, 7 words in, and I'd realize, man, this is way more than a short story, but I don't have the confidence to freaking try to write a novel out of it. I was just trying to find voice and get better as a short story writer. I thought I got to get good first. So I kept doing that. And then maybe around 2012, 13, I was stay-at-home dad at the time. My son was born in 2006, and I quit my job in home health care. And my wife's a teacher. She's an English teacher. And we thought it'd be better if I stayed home. That way we could have 4 months out of the year, all of us home together, and we would just live minimally. And during that time, I started writing a lot more short stories. By the time he started pre-K or kindergarten, 2012 or so, that's when I was like, man, I'm going to start a novel, because he's going to be gone all morning now, 3 days a week or whatever. And so I went in, and that was about the time that Pitch Wars and Pit Mad was starting on Twitter, those things. And so I applied for that, and I actually started writing a story called Garden of Sunray. And I pitched that to the Pitch Wars people. And I got picked up by a mentor, and you work with a mentor, and they help you develop your whole novel, and then they help you develop a pitch. And then they have an agent day where everybody comes, and that's what the whole Pitch Wars thing is. And I won. So I got a mentor, and I worked with the mentor, but the mentor started telling me that she loved the sample I'd sent her, but then she started telling me, well, if you're a new author, she was a lady who writes mysteries and published author. And she told me, well, you need to write something that's set in modern times. First writers don't need to be writing historical fiction. It's not good right now. And so I totally rewrote The Garden of Sunray to be a modern book, actually. And that was my first novel. And I rewrote it to where the guy who's Carl ended up being a 13-year-old Muslim kid. Alice ended up being a 25-year-old male. It ended up being a murder mystery. So I wrote a whole novel, maybe 300 pages, and no agents picked it up. It busted. Nothing really happened with the Pitchfork thing. And so a little bit later, I'm sitting around, and I'm like, man, I changed it because she told me what would sell and what would work, and I shouldn't have changed it. So then I was like, screw it, I'm going to find an idea that I want to do and just write whatever I want. And so I got out my notebook, whatever, found the Boulevard Monster short story that I'd started years earlier. And like, I'm just going to do this one. And so I wrote it. And so it was actually my second novel at the time, but it was the first one that I ever submitted. And then I tried to get an agent with it, of course, too, and was, 30, 40 rejections later. I decided I'll try the small press route. And so I sent it out to 5 different small presses. And 3 of them wanted to buy it within a month. And I was like, man, this worked. I did what I wanted and it worked. I did what I was told to do and what they thought would sell, and it didn't work. And so from then on, I just do, whatever I want to do. I don't care if it's dark, whatever. If I go with it, I go with it, because that's what worked for me. And I know that's sage advice people always give too, write what you want. Don't write what you think will sell. And it definitely proved true for me.
Did your mentor give you definitive statements, as opposed to saying, to make it very clear that this is just my opinion, this doesn't mean it will work for you or anyone else? Which way did she choose that, or did she go a completely different way?
No, she was very nice and kind about it. But she said, and she just said, in her experience, this is what works. And what people are telling her, I think she had 3 books published at the time in the mystery genre. And so she was, and I have nothing. So I listened to her, but she was kind about it. She didn't say for sure, but she just said, I strongly suggest we cancel this chapter. I strongly suggest we redo this in modern time, and don't do a historical fiction. Of course, then later on, a few years ago, I rewrote the whole story the way I wanted to anyway, and that's what Sunray Alice is.
Yes, Sunray Alice. Okay, Brennan, go ahead before I start talking about the book.
Yeah. Oh no, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And I would start by saying, it is very tempting to, listen to somebody, well, they've got 3 books published and I've got 0. So, they have infinitely more knowledge. But
Sure.
At the end of the day, that is one person's opinion. And I am glad that we, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but I am glad we got to read the final version of Sunray Alice, because the book was great, and it's just synopsis wise, it sounds a lot more intriguing than what you changed it to be.
Sure.
What I actually want to jump back to, I was glad you brought up the let's see, you said you were working for Lullaby Hearse and Dark Discoveries,
Yeah.
and that working as a slush reader really helped you kind of hone what you were doing. So I'm wondering, could you share what kinds of things that you took away from that? What exactly did you learn reading such a pile of stories that made you a better writer?
Well, I think most people that whenever they want to be writing, and I did the same thing, I read all the books on how-to writing. I mean, I read, of course, On Writing, and David Morell's book. I think his book is way better technically. I forget what his book called, but David Morell's book, I think for writers is one of the best. Technical, teaches you, like, if you're into technical stuff, it teaches you math, like at this percentage of the story, the art needs to be here. Your characters in conflict, he's real technical about it. But I loved his book and I loved On Writing. But the thing about slush was the opposite of that. Instead of reading something like, here's how you do it right, here's what you need to do to be successful, that slush was, here's what not to do ever. Yep. Here's what never will work, right? And I think it was good. It's like reading a book of what never to do, what not to write, and you see it so many times, and you get to where you see it so much that that's what it taught me. It taught me what never to do, the opposite of what to do. And it helped me to realize too, like when we would have anthologies, it helped me actually hone my short story submissions to be able to where I went from getting, I've been rejected like everybody 200-300 times. I've had 50 short stories published over the years, maybe 60, but I've been rejected probably 500 times. I don't know, but what I learned was how to hone them to get in better. After a while, I started learning, okay, when you have an anthology call and it's about ghosts, after you read hundreds of them, you can see 70% of them come in the same direction. They're going to come in because all of us have these same archetypes in our head of ghosts, of certain things. We all have these archetypes of serial killers or zombies. And if everybody goes with those, most people go with those first impulses. And I learned early on too, reading slush, how to maybe now, whenever I decide to do an anthology call or a short story call, I will always disregard my first 5 ideas, because I automatically assume I'm pulling from the collective archetype that everybody's pulling from right now. I need to step outside of it, and so that's something it taught me too, was how to never just go with my initial ideas, never go with what I think, because so many people come at it from the same angle initially. You'd be surprised that, you read 300 stories and 175 of them start the exact same and have the same. And so to stand out, to be different, is something it taught me too, how to kind of do that and how to look at things a little differently when it came to submitting. Of course, that was just for short stories and specifically when there was themes. But I think, yeah, the slush taught me so much about what not to do, about how not to start stories, about how not to develop plot, like just seeing it over and over and over, you start hating it really.
It's really nice to hear someone throw David's name out there because he's the dude wrote First Blood, Rambo, the first Rambo movie. So that's really fucking cool. I think
man,
you're the
his
first
book
to
on
mention
writing
him.
is great. Yeah, I forget what it's called, but I read it maybe 20 years ago, so it's an old book, but man, it's very good, I thought, because it's more about the writing. Like in Stephen King's book, he doesn't get to writing until halfway through. He does a lot of storytelling like he does. And I love the book, but with Morel, it's the whole thing is about actually writing, crafting, making a story. So I thought it was very good.
Yeah. Brennan, you got anything for that?
Yeah, I want to go to novel writing now. I had read that you put a lot of influence of mystery and suspense, writing, reading, storytelling into your work, and that
Sure.
it kind of helps you develop speed and urgency. And I felt like that was just so on display in The Boulevard Monster. So when that's your first published novel. So when you're writing that, what considerations do you make to just keep the pacing up? Because it is such that's one thing that really stuck with me from that book is the pacing is masterful. You can sit there and you can read that 250 page book and it doesn't slow down for a minute.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I got that a lot. A lot of people saying they couldn't put it down. And when I wrote it, the way I attacked that one was I was still kind of nervous about trying to write something big, even though I'd done that one with the mentor. This was the first one I was just going to do how I wanted. And I didn't have a lot of a plot done. I had a general idea. I'm kind of like like a travel guide when I do plots. I'm not a pantser, not a plotster, right? I like to know if I'm going to take somebody on a tour, I like to know where we're going. We're going from Texas to New York. But I leave it open to where maybe a road's going to be detoured. Maybe this guy's going to try to kill me along the way, but I like to know where I'm going, have a direction, know who's going to be in the car with me, right? So that's all I really had with that story. And so I was a little nervous. So the way I structured it for myself to keep the pace going was I wrote each chapter as a short story almost. And so tried to have the same impact a short story would, where it would start off pretty fast and it would end with either a cliffhanger or something to get you to keep turning the page, So
It makes sense. That's a really good way.
I titled each chapter as its own story and wrote it that way. And I think the way they just roll into each other, it worked out really well.
That's a really good point about novels. It can make it less intimidating too for, I guess, newer writers, which is thinking of a novel as a bunch of short stories,
Yeah, a bunch of interconnected short stories. And I've talked like people when that book came out, I was on a podcast with Armand Rosamilla. I think so. I might be butchering his name.
Armand Rosamilla. Yep.
Yeah. And he said when he first started writing novels, he was the same way. He would approach each one as a short story, the chapters, because it seems less daunting. And then sometimes if you do that too, it makes it to where the chapter can be more impactful within itself because you're not seeing it as something larger. You're saying within this chapter, I want it to be as impactful as a good short story. And so then when you start stacking those up, I think it helps create pace and suspense without even really having to look. And then if the story is cohesive enough and all of those chapters fit together, then it arcs beautifully. Each one fits together in doing that, I would think.
Yeah, because you want the end of that chapter to kind of have a cliffhanger, not the traditional sense, but
yeah, it's something you want them to turn the page. You want them to think either, and it's really just intrigue, right? You want them to want to turn the page, whether they want to know what happens to the character, whether you just introduce something bizarre like the weird birds picking up, or what a note said or whatever, like in that book. You just want you want the reader to feel intrigued at the end of every chapter, pretty much, to turn the page.
The first time I was aware of you was for Ink Heist. when you were on. It's maybe 2 years ago. Had to be 2 years, I think.
Yeah, we were for Cricket Hunters. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you started talking about the mentorship with that, and that made me kind of like really interested in thinking about how on the HWA, they have that was for the HWA, wasn't it?
For the what?
For the mentorship, or was that, am I totally making that up?
Nah, I didn't have a mentorship with the only mentor I did was through the pitch wars thing or whatever, the pitch man with that mentor.
All right.
And it was just through Twitter.
Okay, I thought you had one through HWA too.
No, I didn't ever have one through them. I wasn't even I wasn't a member of the HWA until after the Boulevard Monster, actually, sometime after that. But yeah, I've never done the mentorship through them. I hear it's good though. I hear it's a good program.
Yeah, I have no experience with it, but I just thought it was interesting to kind of point out that not every mentor is meant for every writer.
Sure, yeah.
Brendan, do you want to jump to Sunray Alice, because I really want to talk about it?
Yeah, no, I'm going to throw in one more thing about Boulevard Monster, and then you can take it away. I just think it's so cool that you basically made Blue Jays terrifying with that book.
Right.
Like, I mean, it's just one of those things that if I handed you a book and said, read this, you'll never think about Blue Jays the same way. You're going to kind of give me this, side eye glance. I think I shared with you, I listened to the book, and I would get up at 6 a.m. before work every day and take a walk and put it on my headphones. And it's just starting to hit spring and the birds are calling, and it's like, generally that's a nice atmosphere, but with that book going in your ears, it's a different monster.
Right.
I just felt like that the characterization in that book was really very interesting, because without delving into spoiler territory, you're behind the main character of Seth the entire time, and the further you go, like you almost start to question that, like, am I really behind this guy?
Yeah.
What a debut novel, man. So I mean, good on you. And it was nominated for a Stoker, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was finalist for the first novel, Superior Achievement First Novel.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and the thing about the Blue Jays came up when I was a stay-at-home dad, like I say, with my son, and we were sitting there one day, and there was actually this Blue Jay. We lived in Amarillo at the time, and there was a Blue Jay that would come on our back porch, and for some reason it wouldn't leave. The Blue Jays are nasty little birds too. They attack other birds, and it would come up on our back porch, and it'd be hopping around. And most times you go out on the back porch through the sliding glass doors, and the birds fly away. But there was this one Blue Jay that would never leave. We'd go out there, and it would just freaking hop around your feet like a pet. It was really weird. And I had been writing the story, but something was missing, right? And so then one day we were about to go on vacation, and my son, and he's probably 5, 6 at the time, I'm not exactly sure, but he was like, Dad, do you think that Mr. J, is what he called him, is going to watch the house for us while we're gone so nobody will break in? And I said, sure. And then all of a sudden it clicked, because then I was maybe 10,000 words into the story at the time, but with no birds. And then I clicked, this is something that is missing. There needs to be an oversight over Luther, right? And so then the bird watching the house, so it all just clicked right then, that wham. And so then I went back and rewrote the first, 2 or 3 chapters, incorporating the birds. And then from there on, it flew with it. But that's how they actually got involved, was a bird on my porch one time just wouldn't leave.
They're so crucial though, too, because it's like,
right.
You kind of, as an outsider, you look at the plot and you're like, oh, I would do this. I would go to the police. I would do whatever. Yeah. And the addition of the birds basically takes every one of those options off your plate. So you're just like, you've got this automatic rock and a hard place situation.
Right, that whole isolation, like that a lot of horror has. You have to isolate, you have to constrict, and that those birds were the linchpin for that, for me, that kind of tied it all together, everything else I was working on with it.
Yeah.
You guys like the birds?
Patrick, I'm gonna throw it to you, sir.
Do you guys like Hitchcock's The Birds?
Oh yeah.
The movie still creeps me out. It's right. Still just like, what, seriously, what are you gonna do? Like, I don't have any guns, and I got a baseball bat, but that won't work. Okay, so Sunray Alice, I found that to be it's an absolutely, I say instant classic, not in hyperbole, because it feels like one of those old timey books. It feels like it could sit on a shelf with like a Mice and Men, or I don't know, a Hemingway book. Man, my Rolodex is not working right now, but
It's all the traveling, right? The traveling got you more than
yeah,
that, probably.
it's like 2-year-old that just
Yeah.
loves you, but just doesn't give you a break. Jumps on your stomach, thinks it's fucking funny. Like, leave me alone, you little bastard. I love you though. You're cute. So Alice, Sunray Alice, I thought it was really cool, man, because like we started out without going to spoilers, we started with an old woman, and we're talking about at one point how on helicopter tours or in a helicopter rather, you can see the bird's eye view of this just luscious Garden of Eden, if you will. And uh, at one point, I'm jumping around here, but at one point, we're telling a story of, and I never thought of it as this, but it is a coming of age story where we're talking about a Nazi, but you make this person a protagonist. And I don't want to tiptoe anymore. My toes are getting tired. That's a Brennan line, so I stole that. But can you fill in
Don't
what?
think I've ever said that.
Yeah, I got. Yeah. It's when we had Rowan Hill on and Nico Bell.
Okay. That's my take. I'm done tiptoeing. My feet are getting tired.
On the preview. So can you tell us what the synopsis is? I really should have started with that. I'm off my game so bad. Sorry, Jeremy.
No, it's fine. I mean, the general synopsis of the book, like the back of the book teaser, is just that there is this lady, like you said, who has lived her life. She's in her 90s now, and she has carried a big secret her whole life, and she's the caretaker of this garden. And I've never read a lot of stories that take place where I grew up in the Texas Panhandle. There's not many because there's nothing there. It wasn't established till the 20s or 30s. It's flat. You can't grow anything. So the garden being there, if you've ever been there or know anything about it, having a garden there like that is freaking magic. You cannot do that. You can't grow a tree there unless, you spend $500 in watering. It's insane. But the story was basically she's the caretaker of this garden and there's a huge secret behind it. And she's come to the end of her life and she feels like she needs to pass that on. She can't, the secret she has about the garden and its origin and stuff that happened to her back when she was 16 during World War II, stuff that she's never shared, she decides it's time for me to share it. That everything is aligned, the fates have aligned, the right person has come into place, everything is in order for me to finally pass this on. So it's kind of like she's getting everything she's dreamed of for so many years to finally have everything in motion to get this weight off of her chest. I mean, really, I don't even know if it's a weight, but it's it's not a burden, but it's a desire, I guess, to finally tell somebody her truth and finally have it known this is what happened. And that's kind of the synopsis. And so then it goes, of course, most of the story, 85% of it takes place during World War II in the last week of August, 1944. And a prison escape that happened from an internment camp nearby her town of Sunray. And some of the people that escaped come to her town, and it's her experience interacting with them, meeting some of them, battling them, whatever you want to say. But that'd be the general synopsis, I guess.
In the afterword, you do mention that these are they concentration camps? Was that the proper?
But they're called internment camps.
Oh, internment camps.
Yeah, that's what they were called. Like,
So you said that in the afterword that you found that those were real in your area.
Yeah, I was watching the PBS special and I learned that about an hour and a half from where I grew up. I grew up a little north of Amarillo in the Panhandle, a small town called Borger. But down south of Amarillo is a town called Hereford, and I learned there was a Hereford internment camp. It was actually the second biggest one in the United States at the time, and there were 79 of them in the States at that time, and it was the second biggest one. It had over 5,000 POWs, 300 to 400 military there to guard it. And once I learned that I'd been there, I'd never heard about it. Grew up in the Panhandle my whole life, and I didn't know anything about it. And then I learned about it, and it was just fascinating to me. Man, these were here. I didn't know we had all these camps here in the U.S. And in my research, learned that there were during the height of the war there in the 40s, we were bringing 30,000 POWs a month, Germans and Italians over here. There were camps in every state other than Vermont, Alaska, and Hawaii. But, down in the South is where most of them were because we had the space. In Texas were some of the biggest because they had the space. And that's how I learned about that camp. the one that I based mine on roughly. I tried to keep it similar in size, similar in scope and everything, but of course I changed the name and fudged it where I needed to.
Yeah, that's crazy, man. Like I'm fascinated by that war, and so many of us are. And I know the only internment camp in the U.S. I knew of was the Japanese internment camps after Pearl Harbor. So
Yeah, see, and that's the only ones I knew of too. I had heard of those, and they were more out west, right, like in California and
yeah,
stuff. But the ones like the one in Hereford, it was like what they would do is they would bring the prisoners in through Galveston, the Gulf of Mexico. Then they would put them on a train in Houston and train them up to the Panhandle. And along the way, it's just wide open plains back then. And so they built camps everywhere, huge ones out in the field. And the one up there is kind of like in the story, there was a train track that ran about 2 miles from it. And there was no roads going to or anything, just a dirt road. And so they would stop the train and those guys would get off and have to march the last few miles to the camp. And then they lived there in these 4 giant warehouses, with potbelly stoves, and they worked in the fields around them, a lot like what happens in the story. People would line up when the trains arrived to watch them. I mean, it was a spectacle. There's so many, I read diaries of people that lived around there back then, and watched so many different things and read stuff. It was really weird that I had never heard of it growing up an hour and a half away. I didn't know there were any Germans here and stuff like that. So it was very fascinating to me to learn that. And whenever I learned it, I was like, I want to incorporate this into one of my stories somehow. At the time when I learned it, I just didn't know where, till it fell in place later.
yeah. The only Germans I knew of in any America was South America, where supposedly a lot went to like Argentina, places like
Sure.
that.
But actually, some of the ones I was reading, some of the ones that escaped, real prison escapes happened from the ones in the States, like in my story. And some people, the hardcore Nazis that escaped, tried to get to South America. They would escape these camps and try to make a run from Mexico to head down to South America. Some of the ones that escaped, actually, in some of the stories I read.
Yeah, I saw this the other day. This interview with Nazi youth meeting a Holocaust survivor, and they were these 2 old women, and they had a good conversation. And it ended up, one was the Holocaust survivor was a therapist, and she ended up being the Nazi youth took her on as a client because the Nazi didn't have a good relationship with her daughter because she was raised with a mother that never showed love, never hugged, never did any of this. And she did that with her daughter, and there's resentment, of course. So really, really, really interesting story that, I mean, I'd read that book. They both have actually memoirs, and they exchange books too at some point. So, I mean, there's still a lot to tap into World War II. You think you've read or seen all the stories, but there's just so much to tap into still. Brennan, take us away.
So, I mean, one thing we have been talking about is you putting kind of mystery and intrigue into your stories, but mixing that with real depth of character. And it's a great synopsis. It's such an interesting, like you guys were just talking about, digging into German internment camps. And what if, one of the survivors was not quite who everybody thinks he is? But to me, this story succeeds because of the characterization of Alice. She is just so vibrant. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what went into making Alice.
Yeah. When I think I wrote about this in the author's note too. Originally, it started out as a short story like most of my novels do. And I was telling it from Carl's point of view. And I had set it aside. And then years later, when I decided it met back up with the internment camp stories, that's when I started writing it out. I was like, I'm going to go ahead and do this the way I wanted to, right? Redo that book from before. I just want to do it my way because I needed to work on something there during the first months of COVID lockdown, excuse me. And but when I started writing it, I started realizing this isn't Carl's story. It's more about her. This is her story to tell, and he's involved. And so I started focusing more on her being the protagonist instead of him. And for me, that's when it all shifted and it clicked into place that, yeah, I mean, it's like she started talking to me. It's like I was introduced to a real person and I met this little girl and she started telling me her story. It's like she came to life. I think like when I get older, my memory starts slipping. I'm going to probably talk about her like she was my real neighbor. Like she was my aunt or grandma. Like to me in my head, she really is that real to me. And I think that as I started learning her story, that's why she, I think, started jumping to life to me, because I started realizing, no, this is her story and everything she went through, and how it's not just about Carl and what he went through. And I realized they were both kind of in the same place, right? You know, they both were trying to be forced to be something they didn't want to be. Her into this beautiful, proper, prim lady who's ladylike when she wasn't like that by her mom, and him, you know, with the situation he was in. And they both had recently lost their fathers. They both were trying to find hope when they felt hopeless. And so, but I realized it was more her story to tell than his, even though he was in the same place as her, and that at some point they were going to have to meet. And that worked out good, because they were going to have such a short explosion of a relationship and a togetherness that it had to work for them to be in the same place and be in the same exact situation for it all to come together perfectly. And for her, you know, it just I don't know, she, like I said, it really is a weird thing, one of those magical writing things sometimes where things just start clicking, where it was like she was talking to me and telling me, no, this is my story, let me do it. And I've thought about, you know, like when people ask me, where did she come from, or how does I develop her? And I don't know, you know, I think like it could be I think it's part of a lot of things, maybe my mom being a single mom who was a strong woman, and she's a strong girl. You have my grandma who grew up in a farm in Kansas and didn't have indoor plumbing until the 50s. And, you know, remembered seeing the first car ever drive by in the 20s. Things like that are kind of definitely in there. And at the same time too, which is kind of weird, more of a modern, before I started writing that, I had been playing both Last of Us and Horizon. Both of those games have young female protagonists who are outcast, who are tough as nails, who take it upon themselves to do whatever the hell they want to. And so I wasn't thinking of that writing the book, but I think those probably also filtered in a little bit into her personality and her story. When it comes to her, I guess, demeanor, attitude, behavior type things.
Yeah. I wonder if Pat shares this too. One book that came out, oh gosh, actually, I don't remember when it came out, a year or two ago. Tim McGregor's Heart Strange and Dreadful.
Ooh, yeah.
The main character was a girl named Hester. And Alice just reminded me of that character in that it took a really good book and it made it like just completely memorable. It made it into a book that I'm going to be thinking about years from now. It just elevates it to that next level. And I just think that's so important to have those characters who do jump off the page. And, you know, whatever whirlwind of magic, you know, that it was that you can credit to bringing Alice to life, like it worked. And for me, that's what the book hinges on.
Word wizardry.
Right. Yeah, it was just, like I said, it was almost like meeting her to me.
Mm-hmm.
It started to be like, okay, well, this is what happened. And of course, stuff unfolds along the way that I didn't know, that when you're writing and all of a sudden you realize, oh, this happened to her. And it pops in there and it just worked. It all seemed to flow so well. And I would come in every day, you know, and it was real cool. I would sit down and I would tell my wife, you know, everybody's home because it's COVID. And I would come near, put in my headphones, put on my gloves, do what I do to get ready to go. And I would basically time travel. I felt literally I would time travel for 3 hours every day back to 1944. And I felt like it was a real fun experience. You know, I felt like I really got to go back there and meet her and ride along with her as it happened. So I think that shows in my writing of her how close it was to me personally in a weird way.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I don't think we flat out asked this. How much research was actually involved in this process?
There was a lot of the research, mostly it was just the historical stuff. And it's because I just wanted to do it. I had done the research on the internment camps years before. And then the town Sunray, you know, I grew up around there. And so I kind of knew the Panhandle real well. I grew up there, so I didn't really have to research any of that. But the town itself, though, I did do research on, where like the stuff I put in there, how like, oh, the only roads paved were to churches and Main Street. That's true for the town of Sunray at that exact time. The movie theater being the only place with air conditioning, that's exactly how it was at that time. There was one filling station, there was one grocery store. Like a lot of that I tried to keep in all the diaries I read of people that actually lived there at the time to keep as accurate as I could. And then a lot of the other research was simply to make sure I got the right types of perfumes, the right types of cars, the right types of candy at the store, the right brands of flour that were sold in the Panhandle at that time. So you had to do a lot of research on stuff like that to keep it accurate and to keep the people who like to pick at little things like that from being able to say, hey, they didn't have this such flour at grocery stores then. Everything in there, I guarantee you could have bought in Sunray in 1944 in the Texas Panhandle, or the cars that are there would have been there. The way the town was built out of scraps, how all those, I have it where there's all these empty shacks brought in for oil field workers, all 100% true. That's all historical stuff. That was literally the way it was there. Those towns were thrown up overnight, and the Panhandle, it was a unique place. It really is 10 or 15 years behind the rest. And people are like, well, what about the indoor plumbing? No, there wasn't. There really wasn't. I researched like toilets for a long time, right? How in the East Coast over there, they had toilets in 1880s. First ones were being put in and stuff. Panhandle didn't even have a town until the 1920s. And they popped up overnight as oil towns. They didn't bring in water. They didn't do plumbing. Those towns popped up and went away because they were boom towns. They were oil towns. The ones that stayed were few and far between. I mean, the Comanches were still dominating the plains till the 1880s over here. So it was, those things I had to make sure I got accurate, even though for a lot of people, even when we were editing it with Kenneth King, he'd be like, are you sure they didn't have plumbing? And I'd be like, man, I grew up here. I did research for so long. I promise you, this is accurate. This is the way it was, man. But yeah, so that's the research I went into was mostly for the historical accuracy, to keep it as authentic as I could to the time period and place.
And that's all fascinating. Yeah, I love history. I wrote this short Western, and man, it took me, like, sometimes with shorts, I'll write 2 complete stories. The third one might be it. And then I still got to reconstruct it a bunch of times before I nail it. And then I can start the historic stuff. I don't know how you are. It sounds like you're the same, but I worry about the historical accuracies after I know the story pretty damn well. Like the majority of the stuff, the mechanics, they're not going to change, but the like aesthetics, if you will, sure, I'll change those once I get those nailed down. Like, for example, I was trying to figure out, well, what would a little girl in Montana, because that's where she said it in 1880s, call her father? Would it be dad? Would, like, these aren't rich people, so would it be, what would their nickname be? How would they address, what would they be dressed in for sleep as opposed to their day-to-day shit like that, man? Like, it's it's a lot, but like if you like it, it's fun to do that.
Yeah, I think like you said, story is the most important thing. The story is what sells it. Those little details are things though that just authenticate it, especially because this is the first one I've written that is dated that far back. And I think when you do anything historical like that, you definitely have to try to, the story has to be there, but then those little pieces are what make it real, I think.
Yeah.
Those little historical touches, accuracies, I guess.
For sure. So for people that are in our circles, it's no secret that your book was only out with its first publisher for 2 weeks. And this is addressed to Brennan too. Brennan had just sold, it was public, so no issues here, but he had just sold his second novella,
book
with Silver Shamrock before they closed their doors. And then, they closed shop, and, you guys didn't know at first, and you eventually found out. So when you guys found out, I haven't experienced that. What does that feel like when your book no longer has a home?
You can go first.
Jeremy, we'll throw it to you first.
I'm terrible at that. I should really address who I'm talking to.
I think for me, I was in a really weird spot. I think me and Ronald Kelly were actually in the worst spots, because my book had only been out about 11 to 12 days. His had only been out since the Tuesday before, I think is how it was. So we were in this weird spot where I had just started getting reviews in. I just started trying to sell autographed copies, ARCs, and so then it was very, it wasn't, I don't know, I wouldn't say depressing, but yeah, it was definitely I was dejected, like, oh my God, I've been waiting. I'd signed a contract for this book maybe a year almost before that, and waiting all that time and doing all the editing, getting the cover, getting everything done. And then literally within 10 to 14 days of it launching, and you're like excited, yes, let's see, get it out there, you just get kicked in the face really by, okay, well, it's gone, it's pulled, no. And you start getting emails of people saying, I have review copies, but I refuse to review it. I ordered autographed copies, but I don't want them anymore. And I have to tell people, well, I already sent them, I'm sorry. And I'd be like, you can just do with it what you want, I guess. But I had to deal with a lot of stuff like that. So it was just kind of like, damn, but I couldn't do anything about it except try to go forward. I was a little worried that I wouldn't find another place to place that book, though, because it isn't really horror in the sense that most of the people in the community on Twitter call horror. It's a lot less dark than you look at a lot of these small publishers. And initially, actually, with Sunray too, I didn't even pitch it to horror people. When I finished it, I knew it really wasn't dark. It wasn't near as dark as my first two books, but I was like, I tried to pitch it to other publishers. I didn't even try. And so when Ken actually approached me, he approached me because somebody had told him, I heard you wrote another book and you can't find a home for it. Me and my wife had already decided I'm going to trunk this book because I can't find a publisher. I can't get an agent. But then Ken reached out to me and he was like, well, let me read it. I said, well, I didn't want to pitch it to you because it's not, I see what you published. I know what you published in mine. It's not going to fly with, it's not the horror like that. But he loved it and gave it a shot. So then after those 2 weeks, it was rough to deal with, but all I could do is try to find another place, which is what I had to do. And luckily I found Crossroad. I reached, and I didn't know anything about them other than I know they have a lot of clients like Ronald Kelly. And I knew that he'd been with them a long time. And I didn't really talk to anybody about it, but I reached out to them and told them my situation and told them I had 2 books that needed homes. And they immediately said, sure. And actually the Boulevard Monster, I've been on a monthly contract with that book at the time. My contract for it ran out about a year ago, but to keep it out there, I kept a monthly contract going where I could cancel it at any time. And so once I got on with them with that, I told them, hey, what would you say if I went ahead and brought all 3 of my books? And then the Davids at Crossroads were like, sure, man. Yeah, we'll do them. We'll do audio of all of them. And I was like, and that was a real relief. It was a big relief, actually. And now it's back to the next step, which is hard for me. I tried to start building that momentum for 2 weeks, and then it got shut down for a month. And now it's like people have forgotten. At first, everybody's excited. Ooh, the book's coming out, new book. Yeah, I don't come out with books that often. Once every I've had 3 and 5 years. But all that got shut down so fast that now it's trying to rebuild it is hard because, the cycle moves fast on Twitter and book world, everything. So everybody's already moved on. I mean, it's a month later, everybody's moved on. My book is old news. It's a republished book now, even though it was only out 2 weeks, but I have to try to treat it like it's a new release again. And so, yeah, it was difficult, but what are you going to do? I mean, like I said, it happens. It's something like a rite of passage thing, I guess, with the small presses. It happens, and just got to try to do the best we can.
I hate that mentality of, shiny new thing, which is why like Brennan and I really focus on everything, older books, new, in between. Tell me if you want to pass, I'll cut this part out, but we don't have to go into details, but you did receive pretty ugly messages due to someone else that had nothing to do with you. Now, my question is how, and this is more for people in a newer position of being a writer, or maybe they can relate to another art form, but when you receive, for whatever reason, any form of negativity, especially from a stranger, how did you personally handle it? And do you have any advice for anyone listening that you would say, hey, this is probably a good way to handle that?
Yeah, I think the best way to look at it, the way I did it was the same way I would if somebody gave me a negative review. or the same people that after Cricket Hunters came out and there was some cat that got killed in that, and I got some hate emails about not having animals die in my story. I respond the same way as I did to that, which is, I'm sorry that you feel this way. I'm sorry. I really never meant to hurt anything or disrespect anybody. I sympathize with you, and I'm sorry you feel that way. That's really all I can say, and that's all you can really do is kind of just try to accept where they're coming from. But I try not to blame them or accuse them, or, I understand they're coming at me with some kind of feeling that I maybe don't understand, even if it's not warranted for me. The way my personality is, I'm not going to be combative. I'm not going to tell them it's not my fault. I'm not even really going to try to defend myself because I don't see a point. I'm just going to try to sympathize with them and move on, because I don't think it's going to help for me to do anything else. I don't think there's anything else I could do in that situation that would better the situation or better my stance with them or anything like that.
That's interesting. Maybe I took this away and no one else did, but from what you just said, made me think, and I've gotten lost in it plenty of times, so I'm not saying I haven't, but I think at times, not everyone, but we lose ourselves in the instant reaction where we don't think about even our own mental health, and if this payoff, if this interaction, if this immediate thought in my head, if I say it out loud, how's it gonna make me feel down the line? How's it gonna make the other person feel?
Sure.
I don't really have an ending to that, but if Brendan, if you want to jump in now, feel free, sir.
I thought the two of the first words that Jeremy threw out were dead on. Depressed was the first one, and you want to leap there, but dejected probably is a better one. And I I wouldn't even necessarily. We were in different boats, because that whole "your book has been out 2 weeks," that sucks. I mean, there's just no way to put a shiny label on it. It sucks. At least mine, I knew what I was. It had been out since July. It's firmly in reprint territory. Where I and I have nothing to announce yet. I have some things going on behind the scenes where I'm hoping to have publishers for Slattery Falls, as well as the sequel that is written and ready to go, as well as the third book, which is in the process. And the Western, I hope to have homes for all those announced pretty soon here. But I always heard, don't write a series. And honestly, the biggest reason that I wrote a series was because I knew that there was a home for book 2. People who have read the first book, I mean, it's open-ended, but it could be standalone, absolutely. And I don't know that I would have written book 2 if I knew I was going to have to go shopping for a home for it. So I am hoping to find a place that will, take the first 2 and agree to do book 3 as well. And the Western, it was dejecting at first, but at the same time, it had been under contract for, I think, maybe a week and a half. It never saw print, never saw edits, nothing beyond just signed contract. So, I mean, I almost look at that as a rejection. I'm still shopping that one. And that one, that's an easier sell. I already know I've already got a couple people interested in that. That one's going to definitely have a home, hopefully sooner rather than later. Right. And I had a lot of really good people in the horror genre reach out. Just thankfully, I didn't get a lot of those nasty messages, maybe because my book hadn't just come out, but I had a lot of positive outreach. And a lot of people offering advice. And the one that stuck with me is it's an opportunity, because sure. As happy as I was with the whole process behind Slattery, cover design, editing, interior art, release and everything, I have no bones about, having worked with Silver Shamrock at the time, having, all 4 books that are in the world in the same place, it's not a bad thing, but now I have the opportunity to see, well, what can these things do? What can I do with them if I spread them around, if I go elsewhere? What new readers can I reach with these stories? So that's kind of the way I look at it. And, it's wild to me that you had trouble finding a home for Sunray Alice, and he said this online, this isn't a secret. Kenneth Kane has said, who edited the book, says this is, I think, the best book that Silver Shamrock put out. So it was a cap, but it was, that's no small feat, man. They were around for near 3 years and putting out almost 2 books a month. That's pretty damn high praise, and good for you, because I think you've earned it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when he told me that, it blew my mind, because I know how many books he's worked on and all the editing he does. And it was kind of weird because I was the second to last book they released, and I was the second book they put out, because the very first book they put out was In the Scrape with Steensland and James Newman. Cricket Hunters, my book, was their very second book ever published by Silver Shamrock. And then Sunray was the second to last one ever released before Ronald Kelly's, the next Tuesday. So it's kind of like I was the second to last, second right off the bat with them. But yeah, I know Ken Kane did a lot of good, all the stuff he did with them. It was very humbling, and it's very, it made me feel really good to hear his praise about it. And it was just, but I think it was hard to place strictly because, like I said, it's a little less dark than what a lot of these small press horror places like. And I know that a lot of us readers, we read, most people in this, we read anything. I read science fiction, Western, but the publishers themselves, a lot of them are very niche they like specifically darker stuff. And this was a little less dark than that's why I think I had trouble placing. People were like, it's not really horror. It's not really. I even had people that wanted to maybe do it as young adult. And I was like, well, I guess it kind of is. There's not graphic violence. There's not any sexual things at all. So it's could be considered that, but I think that was why I had a little trouble finding a place for it. It just wasn't dark enough for the horror, but it wasn't mystery or suspense enough, it was kind of an in-betweener. But I knew if I could just get it out there, my hope was people would read it and like it no matter what.
That ending especially. I don't know how you can read that book and not just fall in love with it. I think it's a really good book, and that ending just, I can't say why because it will spoil it, but it just does something very unique that can open up in any direction it wants, or it can stay isolated as that one story, and they will both work incredibly well. And jumping back to Kenneth Kane, he deserves, and I'm sure most listeners won't understand why, but Kenneth Kane is, he deserves a goddamn plaque because he does stuff where it was a moment where someone needed to step up, and Ken was there for every single author, and more people should be like him. So if you are listening, if you do not know who Kenneth Kane is, he's also a writer. We encourage you to check out his books.
Yes.
Brennan, which direction would you like to take us in, sir?
Do you want to go to currently reading?
Yeah. Jeremy, what are you currently reading?
Today I've been reading Hearts in Atlantis. I actually recently finished, speaking of Tim McGregor, I just finished Wasps the other day, Wasps in the Ice Cream. And then I've never read the one about Hester, so I have to look into that one. I forget what you said it was called. What was it called?
Strange and Dreadful.
Okay, yeah, I need to look that one up because I read Wasps. I got an ARC of that, and I read that. But today, actually, I was reading in Hearts in Atlantis. I'd never read it. Of course, I've seen the movie. And so I read the first story in there, which was the movie version. And now today I started the second novella in there, which is when they are in college in the 60s, I guess. So, but that's what I was reading this morning. So I've never read those. I didn't actually know it was 4 novellas till recently. So tried to read that one.
That's a really good one. I was just recommending that to Patrick recently because he's, he loves I guess historical horror would be the right, term for it. But basically, stuff that takes place in the past. And it's well done. It's not necessarily typical King, but it's a good collection. It's a memorable one.
I think some of my favorite stuff of King's is his 1120 263. I think is my favorite novel of his ever.
Yeah,
it has nothing like the 40 other novels that are strictly horror, but I love his stuff like that. So
that's such a great book. And
yeah,
what I really love, I mean, like, I'm a sucker for JFK stuff. It probably is because he's a Massachusetts Irish boy, just like myself, and I'm like, that's fucking cool. That guy fucked Marilyn Monroe.
The Celtics tonight. Did you see the Celtics tonight?
They won 2. They're up 2. Yep.
They ended up winning. When I came in here, they were losing by 7.
No, they were down by 7 or 8 most of the game, but they dominated the second half of the fourth quarter. Yeah.
Good. I'm rooting for them, man. I'm rooting against Durant and Kyrie and them. But when I came in here earlier, I'd been watching that they were down by 7. At the first half, they were getting slaughtered, but then I saw they were starting to make headway, the first part of the second half. But
oh man, the game they played on
Game 1
Sunday, maybe.
I saw that.
That game was
fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah,
the ending of that was great.
It's a good series. Brandon, what are you currently reading?
Oh, I've got we haven't recorded the show in a while, so I'm like all stocked up. We are speaking with Patrick C. Harrison tomorrow, co-founder of Death's Head Press. So I just finished his splatter western, A Savage Breed. It is savage indeed. Patrick does not hold back in his writing at all.
No, he doesn't.
If you have not read, he has that. He has a collection of short stories, Visceral, which is co-written with Christine Morgan, Visceral 2, which is co-written. I don't think that one's out yet.
No,
with Daniel Volpe. He doesn't even, he definitely does not write with a filter. But that said, he's a very good writer. He knows how to keep that narrative voice going. So I mean, like, I saw a lot of people had tapped out on that book because it was just too much at the beginning, and I completely commiserate with that. If you read the first 20 pages of that book and were like, nope, this is not for me, you're probably right. But I mean, he does have a great storytelling voice, if you can overlook that. And speaking of great storytelling voices, I just also finished Pearl by Josh Mallerman. I think that was my last unread Mallerman, so now I gotta wait for his next one to come out. And I'm also working on the Book of Queer Saints. And this is one that I want to, encourage people to check out because it's edited by Mae Murray. And she just poured everything she had and then some to making this project come to life. Absolute passion project. And, every story in it, it's got people like Haley Piper, Eric LaRocca, Joe Koch, Eric Raglan, a bunch of people. And it's very carefully curated, like I said, it just, you read it and you know how much care and time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears she put into it. So I would definitely recommend people check that out. Patrick, what about you?
Yeah, so I'm in the middle. I got different TBRs. I got audiobooks, ebooks, physical books. So for a physical book, it's upstairs. I forgot to bring it down. I'm reading Anybody Home by Michael J. Seidlinger. I really hope I'm not butchering his surname, but it's a home invasion book where it what's that thing? Fourth dimensional, where it's like the characters talking to the reader. Bring the fourth wall. Not fourth dimensional. Jesus Christ. Yeah. So I'm reading that right now, and it's kind of doing that, and it's really interesting. Like, it's subtle and it's not like creepy at first, but then I'm thinking about it, and I'm kind of getting like some Francis Dolarhyde vibes at times from Red Dragon. simply for the fact of like, I remember this one scene for those that haven't read it. They're the serial killer, first Hannibal Lecter book, where Francis is on a tree looking in at a family, and I just like, I don't like my blinds open at night, because I'm probably paranoid from all these horror books, but like that, I don't want anyone looking at me that I can't see. It's just so creepy. So yeah, really good book, comes out in August. I'm finishing up Patrick C. Harrison, and is it Volpe or is it Volpe? Daniel Volpe?
I think it's Volpe.
Okay, so yeah, I'm reading Visceral 2. Where do I start with that book? It is full of it's fucking gross, it's nasty, but like I don't say that in a bad way. I want to eat while you read this book. I can't because I'm a bitch with that stuff, but it's really good. Like they're both excellent writers. Really good stuff there. And just a quick shout out to an older book. It's called 361 by Donald E. Westlake. I'm trying to cram in as many hard case crime books as I can before we have one of the co-founders of Hard Case Crime next month, Charles Arda. Arda, again, surname, please hope I tell me I'm not fucking that up. And that's enough out of me. Jeremy, where can people follow you?
They can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all the general sites, I guess. Goodreads, Amazon. My name's pretty unique. It's pretty easy to find. You just type my name in any of those places, you'll be able to pull me up pretty quick.
So it's just to be clear, it's your full name for your.
Yeah, like I think on Facebook it's Jeremy Hepler. On Twitter it's at Jeremy Hepler. On Instagram it's Jeremy Hepler author. So
Perfect. Do you have any final thoughts?
I really don't. One thing I will say is cool though that I did today, that with Sunray, what was cool is for the first time I got to with Crossroad, they sent me a bunch of auditions for the audio book. And so this afternoon,
cool.
Wow, that's fucking, dude, that's fast.
Huh?
That's, sorry to cut you off. That's really fast.
Right. And so I didn't expect it either. And so David emailed me today and was like, and sent me this huge file of these, we're trying to get a woman to read it, with the Southern drawl. So it'll be, since it's a lot first story, and he sent me all these different people that had auditioned. So that was something cool that I got to do today. That I've never done that before. Got to take part in the audio version of that and listen to them all. So it's kind of cool to hear them all read the same section and go back and play them over and over and different ones and try to figure out, okay, which one to me is Alice, which one is, so that was something cool. And also on that same front with Crossroad today, also David Dodd, the other David there, we finished the ebook version of Boulevard Monster today. We redid the cover. We're going to use the same picture, but we redid he had to redo the cover, and then we redid the inside. So the the ebook is actually going to be back. It's been down for a while now, but for a month, just like the other ones, but it goes back live tonight too. And then the print one should be back out soon. But I learned that today, went through the last proofread of the digital copy of the Boulevard Monster. So it should be back up and out there soon.
Crossroads does good audiobooks. I've listened to a few of theirs. For Ronald Kelly's books specifically. I can't believe they're doing, talk about Cascade. They're taking on a lot of books. I'm sure I'm not even aware of most of them, but from the ones that I've seen, I mean, it's not even like they're just like, well, let's take all of them. They're taking books that they believe in, and they're doing a good job. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine how many hours it would take to organize all that stuff.
Right.
Just going through the technical things to set up the books and all that. I mean,
well, and all the logistics of it, because all of us had to send them all of our files from Shamrock. So we had to, I have a shared folder where I had to download my Mobis, my EPUBs, my PDFs, my covers. Everything has to be reformatted and changed. And so, yeah.
Right. Because of the logo and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Wow. That's crazy. Brennan, any final thoughts?
No, I just want to thank Jeremy for your time. I hope that people will check out Sunray Alice. Like you said, people tend to go for what's shiny, and it is technically a reprint, but is it ever worth your time? Can't say enough good things about this book, man.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, my final thoughts is that Sunray Alice really is. It's surprising that there weren't there wasn't a line of publishers ready to buy this thing, man. I mean, it's seriously something that I really hope that whoever's listening to this considers buying the book, reading it, and giving you feedback, because that's really important to remind people to give the authors positive feedback. If you have anything negative to say, shut the fuck up. Next episode 143 is with Patrick C. Harrison III. He's the co-founder of Death Set Press. As we said, he's the author that Brandon and I really enjoy reading. Listeners, as always, you have many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.